As the neon lights, tequila haze, and the beats of Tito and Tarantula's After Dark fill up the surroundings, we see time stop as a Santánico Pandemonium enters the stage, with a python wrapped around her and eyes that flicker like hellfire. This moment would forever be etched into cinematic history as Salma Hayek gave her iconic performance in 1996's From Dusk Till Dawn as a vampire queen that shook the world. Apart from being absolutely tantalizing, the scene was filled with horror, action, and genre-defining storytelling elements. The same character would be reborn 2 decades later with Eiza González as she stepped into the blood-soaked Santánico Pandemonium's persona. Let's take a look at the life of Santánico Pandemonium from the Dusk Till Dawn franchise, the most sinister woman to dance on the face of the earth. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Santánico Pandemonium, the Queen of the Night. The combination of these two renditions of Santánico Pandemonium would lend their hand in creating a character that transcends archetypes and leaves a permanent imprint on pop culture. While the original entry from 1996 didn't provide any exposition and stuck to pure visual storytelling, the 2014 show by the same name led us into the mythos that makes her much more than one could have imagined. That doesn't mean that Salma Hayek was playing the character as a mere vampire, because she managed to infuse elements of ancient power and a mythical figure, a queen. The later version of her story brings an arc that puts Santánico Pandemonium at the center and shows her journey from being a slave to a queen to someone who writes their fate. The new lore makes the character more iconic by subverting the femme fatale concept. A classic femme fatale provides the woman with the tools to solve a scenario while being beautiful, mysterious, and dangerous. But Santánico Pandemonium goes against this trope by recreating it entirely in a manner that changes the definition. Santánico Pandemonium is a femme fatale who survives her own story and uses her ability to lure men, dominate them, and use them for her benefit. It's difficult to convert a grindhouse film into a multi-season TV series based on one character. Still, the lore of Santánico Pandemonium and the brains of Robert Rodriguez make it all feasible. So let's go on a journey that explores the lore, and please make sure you don't get lost in her beauty. Origins of the name, nunsploitation history. The name Santánico Pandemonium immediately makes us wonder about the lore associated with this being, like a stage name that a wrestler might have. But there's a lot attached to this name, and it's something that we must discuss before we get into the life of this seductive vampiress. One of the original plans for the character was to have her named Blonde Death or White Death. Still, when Quentin Tarantino realized that they were going for a Latino star, particularly Salma Hayek, based on her performance next to Antonio Banderas in Desperado, he decided to change the name. The name Santánico Pandemonium was kept for the character, and it comes from a gory 1975 Mexican horror movie that Tarantino had seen on the shelves of the video store where he used to work. Blonde Death is good, but it's better that Tarantino saved it for something else. Santánico Pandemonium helped with the name of the vampire queen, but there's a chance that it might have influenced a lot more than that, because the 1975 film seems to be a direct line of thematic inheritance, filled with fire and blasphemy. Directed by Gilberto Martinez Solares, the film was itself influenced by Ken Russell's The Devils, and riddled with religious ecstasy and demonic possession. So in a way, we can say that a nunsploitation horror film sowed the seeds that resulted in the creation of the Vampire Queen. With every movie that comes out, we're thankful that Tarantino's origins had a video store in it. Now, there's a lot of lore about Santánico Pandemonium because of how the character evolved, as the creator Robert Rodriguez mentioned in an interview. Originally, she was called White Death. Quentin had the idea to cast Madonna. She was just someone who came out and killed everybody, then got killed right away. I said, we can do something more. It's set in Mexico. We should make her Mexican. And I worked with this girl on Desperado, so he rewrote it for Salma and called her Santánico. And I added the snake dance because I wanted to use the snake thing. The movie didn't have room for mythology the way the series does, but I try to stick it in there. We have that shot of the temple. That wasn't in the script. I added all of that to add a historical context to it all, just as a texture. When she got killed, even though she disappeared, I told her to smile as she disappears so we would think she wasn't really dead. And you'll notice Salma does a knowing smile as she disappears. In my mind, that's not how she's going to die. She shouldn't live forever, but maybe she tricked the gods. When we got the TV series, I thought now we can make her a main character. I loved how when Quentin got into the bar, she zeroed in on him. I wanted to start the connection sooner and make it more. That's the whole season 1. It wasn't intentional when I made the film, but later when I would watch the movie over the years, I would think I really wish there was more between these two characters, Richie and Santánico. And now that's what the whole series is based on. It's fun when you get to go back and remake something you've already made because you get to do it better the second time. So let's check both the lores. While one sounds like a rumored version of the other, it's up to you to pick which one's a rumor and which is the true story of the mistress of the macabre, the epitome of evil, the most sinister woman to dance on the face of the earth. Dancer to Demon, From Dusk Till Dawn. While Robert Rodriguez had strong plans for Santánico Pandemonium, his first take on her arc only gave us a small taste of this character and her lore. So let's indulge in that before we go deeper into the lore and find out about Santánico Pandemonium before Rodriguez manages to make a complete series that explores her arc. In the blood-shadowed borders of Mexico in 1894, a land where myth and man are blurred under the sun, a girl who would go on to be a legend was born. Named Esmeralda, the girl's skin burned under the sunlight, and yet her heart throbbed with human blood, and thus she wasn't really mortal or entirely damned. She was a child born from human and vampire blood, also known as Dampier. Her father, Mauricio, was rumored to be a priest who later turned into a vampire hunter, and it was only during this later profession that he came across Esmeralda's mother, the vampire queen, Quistla. Her father united them, and the union produced Esmeralda, and right after her birth, Mauricio realized that it could lead to the worst fate for the baby, so he managed to flee from Quistla with the child and didn't look back. Even though Esmeralda never really saw her mother, there were semblances of what she might have been like, as the girl's earliest memories were filled with cruel hands and silences that would fill themselves with screams. Mauricio didn't want the child to have any of her mother's traits, so he brought her up amongst mortals and tried to shackle her true instincts by punishing anything that adhered to her true self. But as the girl grew older, she started showing uncanny strength, healing powers, and even her hunger that struck when the moon would turn red. And Mauricio, out of desperation, turned violent, thinking that it would stop these traits. Still, it didn't do anything. Finally, when all things failed, he opted for death, and yet Esmeralda kept coming back. Soon the word spread about the girl who could not be killed, and Mauricio ran desperately while being hunted by his own blood. Then came the time when Esmeralda finally met her true fate at 19, when Mauricio came across a young outlaw, Johnny Madrid. Esmeralda watched them in secret, but Mauricio could sense her presence and acted on it instantly, only to escape from his hold, and Johnny managed to take Esmeralda with him as a hostage. Even though it felt like he was holding her hostage, there was something more to this, because she also affected him, which made him take her along. As the two continued their escape, Esmeralda realized that something about Johnny was similar to her fate. Both of them were broken people. Eventually, their path would take them to a place that is known as La Tetilla del Diablo, or the Devil's Nipple. And even though it would look like boulders put together like a rock formation, there was a lot more to this place than what meets the eye. Underneath this place was the Ancient Blood, a vampiric royalty that had been sleeping all along, something that managed to trigger a sense of belonging inside Esmeralda. She could feel her mother's presence at this place, for underneath this place remained Quistla, who was rumored to have been killed. It was Quistla herself who had managed to rule from the shadows, and she might have been the one who had orchestrated the events that led to Esmeralda being brought back to her. Once Esmeralda was informed about being chosen as the heir, the vampire princess, it was as if her entire world had shattered, and she realized that her father had been punishing her to erase her past, only to end up pushing her to the family she truly belonged to. As she went deeper into into the lair, her powers strengthened, and she evolved into her true form while her hunger grew sharper. But with her mind being cleared from all the confusion about herself, Esmeralda shed her name. She took the title of Santánico Pandemonium, a name from an ancient scripture used to describe the seed of Hell's rebellion. But it wasn't any mere name. It was the very status she held as she was crowned the Queen of Vampires. Now that she had taken her true form, she started acting on it and killed her grandmother, the ancient matriarch who had gone against Quisla rule, and thus Santánico stabbed her in order to bind her fate with the vampiric lineage. As the blood soaked her hands, she slowly turned into the darker being, the one that her father tried to prevent her from becoming. So her next act involved turning her father into a vampire, cursing him with the very thing that he hated. Still, Mauricio took the opportunity and killed her mother, Quisla, as a final act of defiance to them. Now, Santánico was all alone, and the Esmeralda inside her tried to wake up for the first time when Johnny decided to run away from her out of fear. Santánico became the lonely queen of the vampires in the darkness, yet she managed to change things around her. The vampire temple would be converted into a strip club, and soon all types of truckers and criminals would visit Santánico's lair, while she got the title of Queen of the Titty Twister. Using her beauty as a weapon, she filled the men with desire and fear, and none escaped her wrath. Once a child who didn't know her fate, Santánico became a living nightmare who decided the fates of men she tempted. But then came the Gecko brothers in 1996, as Richie and Svet were running from one of their latest crimes and landed up at her lair. It was business as usual until the first blood was shed, and Richie, the weaker of the two, would be the first prey that Santánico would feed on. Realizing that Seth was different from most of the men she had come across, she decided to offer him slavery, but she didn't know that the memory of a lost wife held Seth back, and he refused the offer. It's said that she was later killed by a chandelier that fell on top of her and crushed her beneath the weight of the very stage that she had set for herself. But that cannot be the end of the ballad of the Queen of the Vampires of Titty Twister. Hold your horses, there's more to come. Bloodlines and backstories. The mythos expanded in the TV series. Before we jump deeper into the lore of Santánico Pandemonium, what made her who she is, and the true story involving more than being a vampire, we must know about Xibaba and the Culebra. So let me tell you a bit about a community you might have never considered. Derived from the Spanish word for snake, Culebras are an entire race of vampiric beings who aren't exactly vampires, but have some similarities in supernatural entities with darker origins than you might have expected. According to lore, they're believed to be direct descendants of a serpent goddess, and this is clearly shown by their distinct snake-like features, including green skin with scales and fangs that are very similar to a serpent. These mythical beings are traced back to the ancient Aztecs, which only makes sense because the Aztecs were rich with traditions and beliefs and viewed snakes as symbols of divine power. However, the primary realm where these beings existed is Xibaba, which is also regarded as the underworld, with huge similarities to other descriptions of hell itself. It's almost like a version of the Upside Down from Stranger Things, but there's more of a Mars-like hellish feature. Now, Xibaba is the realm where the Culebras were treated as enslaved people under the rule of the demonic beings. The ruler of Xibaba was Queen Amaru, a formidable demon who had absolute control over the Culebras, and she treated them as ruthlessly as possible. The Culebras were considered the lowest of the low in the hierarchical structure of this society, and they would undergo some of the most brutal punishments if they defied authority. These punishments involved the removal of their fangs, thus taking away their only means of sustenance. Over time, the Culebras hatched a plan for a rebellion, and that resulted in the escape of a group of them who would later be known as the Nine Lords, who would go on to become the Lords of the Culebras, known as the Lords of the Night. The leader of the Nine Lords of the Night was Amancio Malvado, someone who would play an important role in this race's future. Each of these lords had a significant role during their servitude. For example, there was Vengaza, the servant of Queen Amaru. As a revenge for their years of service and terrible treatment, the Nine Lords set a trap for Amaru and ended up killing her by devouring her. But the only thing that survived of her was her blood, something that could not be consumed due to its unbearable power. So they decided to seal it under the earth. Hence, the Culebras were broken from their tyranny. tyranny. Now, this liberation would be a bigger win for them than one can imagine, as they managed to gain control over vast territories that would later end up as Mexico and Texas. Each of the 9 lords held power over a part of this land, and with time, they would also establish their tyrannical system on these lands, not very different from the rule they used to be under. Within these lands was a temple, which would later be known as the Titty Twister. This temple was not just a place to revel in the historic takeover that the Culebras were able to establish, but it was also a place where many blood rituals would be carried out that would be important to sustain the powers of this race. The dark history of the Culebras continued to persist until the birth of Kisa, born during a sacred cycle aligned with a major celestial event, when the morning star aligned with the sun. When the Culebras knew of her, they realized she was a significant figure for their race and had a stronger connection to the divine than anyone else. So it was meant that Kisa was destined for something much greater according to the Aztec society. The 9 lords of Culebras realized her importance and sacrificed innocent lives to appease all the gods who had a divine connection with Kisa. But Kisa was horrified and repulsed with shock when she discovered what was being done in her name, as a large number of innocent lives were sacrificed over time. Even though she understood that there was something significant associated with her, the death of these people made her start wondering about her place and purpose. As Kisa's struggle with herself escalated over time, so did the bloodlust of the 9 lords, and eventually Kisa decided to escape from civilization. And even though she had a lot of significance in their religion, Kisa was pursued by the priests who were holding her, and they somehow managed to capture her. And as a punishment for going against the will of the 9 lords and the hierarchy of the Culebra society, she was thrown into a pit filled with snakes. While it might sound like the worst possible punishment for an innocent girl, it's associated with biblical connotations where snakes were seen as symbols of temptation and treachery. During her punishment, one of the serpents entered her mouth. The ritualistic act began, which would eventually convert her into one of the Culebras, and Amancio Malvado ensured this conversion. Thus began the very transformation that would change Kisa forever, from an innocent girl to a sinister being who is very much in league with the Culebras, and it would also give her some demonic powers. She would be named Santánico Pandemonium, associated with the idea that her domain would bring chaos, also known as Pandemonium. Once her transformation was completed, Santánico came to terms with the fact that she was now confined to the bounds of the temple through some supernatural forces. There she remained stuck for about 5 centuries, providing sustenance for the lords as their blood hunger increased. But like most Disney princesses, throughout her confinement period, her beauty remained undeniable, and it would become one of her strongest powers that would be used to lure men into the temple and thus satiate the hunger of the lords. For years, Kisa's innocence and any semblance of her humanity would slowly die out. Santánico Pandemonium's wrath on multiple lives through her beauty would become the prime cycle through which the Culebras persist. And then came the Gecko brothers, but this time there was more to them than just 2 criminals swooned by Santánico Pandemonium's beauty. Instead of becoming mere victims of the Culebras, these brothers would become the key figures to help Kisa escape from her cursed confines. The 2 fugitives had just committed a bank heist that resulted in the killing of several law enforcement officers, and that's when they ended up finding some shelter at the infamous Titty Twister. Like the earlier mythos, the brothers had distinct personalities, with Seth being level-headed. At the same time, Richie exhibited some sort of mental illness, with bursts of paranoia and schizophrenia. When Richie first laid his eyes on Santánico, he was instantly captivated by her beauty and power. He started experiencing strong visions, which were a part of Santánico's telepathic abilities. This connection will be essential in Santánico's possible freedom from her confines. Richie's vulnerability to her powers would allow her to share something that she hasn't been able to share with her past victims. As the brothers arrived at the bar, everything seemed normal with a typical bar setting. Later in the evening, things go haywire as it turns into a devilish place that looks like something out of a nightmare. And it's here that, unlike the last time, the brothers turn into heroes from mere fugitives. Once the Culebras show their true nature, the brothers realize they're in danger. Yet, Santánico's transformation into the Culebra affects them differently as they start understanding her fear and struggle. Richie is turned into a Culebra by Santánico herself during the first attempt by the brothers to escape. But this turn of fate only strengthens their bond with her. And it's then that they come across the labyrinth underneath the bar, a supernatural maze, a prison for those who want to help rescue Santánico. Seth enters the labyrinth to face the challenges of assisting in the rescue of Richie and Santánico. During his time there, he comes across a variety of challenges that include facing his past, amongst other mental and emotional difficulties. With the discovery of the labyrinth, even Santánico comes to terms with her untapped potential and learns how to harness her supernatural abilities. She realizes how she could use these powers to go against her captors and reassert her true fate, which was prophesized based on her birth. When the time comes, Santánico will not only go against the beings who held her against her will, but will also reclaim her position as the powerful being she was supposed to be. While the brothers go through the maze, she guides them telepathically to make sure that situations get manipulated in their favor. After going through sufficient confrontations with past traumas, the brothers finally come across the mechanism that's supposed to help them free Santánico. Richie ends up swallowing a serpent with Santánico's blood, thus making him her prince. Finally, Richie and Seth reach Santánico, and while she performs her final ritual to release herself from the bonds, the serpent from Richie ends up biting her, thus giving her all her powers back. Now the ritual is completed, and sunlight enters the bar only to kill all the Culebras except for Richie and Santánico, and the newly formed duo escapes to America. So the next time someone tells you the previous myth about Santánico's death, remember that it wasn't her death, it was her liberation. And yes, the Gecko brothers did prove to be of much help in the process. Once she's set free, Santánico pairs up with Richie to go and hunt down the person responsible for her captivity, Amancio Malvado. But Malvado, upon realizing that Santánico is now free, brings out his bounty hunter, the Regulator, to hunt her down. Thus begins the hunt that Amancio started, and Richie helps her get close to Amancio to kill him. But over time, they discover the abilities of the Lords and that somehow they will never manage to get out of the hands of the Lords because of their ability to detect the presence of the Culebras. Richie decides to kill Amancio to become Lord, but Santánico isn't excited about this idea. Santánico finally faces the person who changed her, Amancio, and as the two go against each other, Amancio manages to use his powers to paralyze her. As Amancio reveals his intentions, she finally frees herself and attacks him and rips out the serpent from inside him, and that reduces him to ashes. And that's how you kill the Culebra Lords. Right when it seems as if she's free and she's managed to kill the person who ruined her life, Amaru is released into the world and she is driven towards opening a gateway to hell to destroy both Culebras and humans. The Gecko brothers meanwhile come to a wholly new Santánico, who's trying to let go of her past. Santánico had left behind the past and had become the boss of an underground fighting ring called Piedras Negras. She refuses to join them in their plan. Still, right around then, they're attacked by Olmeca, another being from Jibaba, and as it starts butchering Culebras, Santánico kills it. And that's when she realizes that she has to join the Gecko brothers. But to defeat Amaru, she has to revive Carlos, another Culebra who stood as the final one to stop her from her plans to liberate herself from the temple. Carlos had a lot of history with Santánico, and that's why she felt that she could seek his help, even though she, along with the Gecko brother, had chopped his body into pieces to stop him. Finally, the team reaches Matanzas, where they plan to battle Amaru and her demons, a battle that will end everything for the time being. Santánico heads to the tunnels to find the Culebras who had been held captive, and she decides to set them free. But there she finds some Culebras who wanted to work for Amaru. Now you see why the lore was important. As Santánico tries to convince them to switch sides, she fails. But Carlos tells her that she is their diosa, and that if she shows them that she is indeed their leader, they might take her side. Finally, when Santánico confronts Amaru, the queen takes her true form, which is quite the challenge as Santánico faces defeat. In the end, Santánico somehow manages to stab her with a spear, and Amaru is sent back to Jibaba while the other Culebras are liberated. As they head back, Santánico becomes the leader of the Culebras, who will be better than the past ones who ended up repeating what Amaru had done to them. Santánico powers: liberation, rage, and revenge. Now, the living legend might have had the mythic dancer lore working for her, but Santánico is a lot more than that, with her supernatural dominance that goes to prove that she is a being forged from ancient bloodlines and dark rites. We have to see her in action, and most of it involved fangs. In fact, Santánico's vampiric abilities, along with her look, movement, and whisper, make her the seductive icon she is. The first ability that comes to mind mind when talking about the Queen of Vampires is her immortality, an important factor preventing her beauty from ever being blemished. And yet, some can use her ability completely against her by weaponizing her to lure men. Yet this ability only works because she has the metaphysical ability to pull these men into a trap. Now, this is possible because of the very next element that works in her favor, and it's none other than her telepathy that allows her to dive into her victims' thoughts, secrets, and memories to bend them according to her will. Unlike other telepaths, Santánico can also plant thoughts into her victims' heads and share hallucinations, making sure that she only appears to certain individuals. Another ability she has often used in the series is the shape-shifting one, where she can disguise herself as other people to enter certain unsuspected environments. In fact, in her monstrous reptilian form, she can rip through enemies while maintaining control over her rage, something that even most of the transformed kinds fail to do. While most vampires have these powers amongst others, the ability to fly only adds to her beauty. Whenever a situation calls for it, she can use her rarest gift, the wings, to lift herself above others, figuratively and literally. Marvelous verdict. Santánico Pandemonium embodies a danger that appears to be wrapped in desire. This character goes beyond the usual trope of a femme fatale. Be it Salma Hayek or Eiza González, this queen of vampires will forever be an example of beauty and rebellion. It's not every day that we see an iconic character take her lore and flip the script by rewriting it and becoming horror's most unforgettable figure. Robert Rodriguez is continuously working on his next big lore, and it won't be surprising if we get a chance to visit Santánico Pandemonium once again. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.